welcome everybody this afternoon to this Advent with a View talk. Now, some of you may already have noticed that we're not in the church. We're in the garden because at the moment, restrictions at the moment don't allow us to film in St Mary's. So we've relocated to the garden. We might get some visits from some cats, a squirrel, the birds, possibly even a dog. All are welcome, it doesn't matter, but just to be warned. For those of you who have not met us before, may I introduce Zoe Davis, who is
Hello.
our art historian, and myself, Reverend Charmaine Saby Corkindale. Advent with a View this year, the talk is based around that wonderful old carol, God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen. But before we begin, I just want to give some particular thanks, and those go to Alan and the choir at St Mary's. Thank you so much for all the hard work you've done and the beautiful singing that we're going to hear later. Thank you to Neil and the team for the film, sound and editing. It's really kind of you. Thank you very much. Thank you to St Mary's team as a whole. And thank you also to Charlie, who's filming today. Right, over to Zoe.
Thank you very much. So we're looking at this wonderful Christmas carol, and one of the lines that really sort of struck me was God rest you merry gentlemen. And in St Mary's there is the most wonderful painting over the doors, and it's a Rubens style painting, and it is the most wonderful large canvas. It's incredible. The painting is in the style of the old masters, very similar to the Rubens paintings. It's also got quite a lot of characteristics that are similar with the Rubens painting. It uses similar staging, how you see from the top corner with all the men going all the way down in a line to the head of the Virgin Mary, who's dressed in white. She's got very pale skin. It really draws your eye in. And then as you look at her arm, the arm sweeps around and leads you to the infant baby Jesus. There's a massive sense of movement in this painting, which I think is really captured. I love the fact that the people are all leaning in. It feels like it's moving, it feels like it's alive, it's got a real energy to it. The infant and Mary are just so bright as she leans over Jesus protectively, as a mother would. The eye is drawn, as I said, down through the painting, along the people, to that core moment in the painting of the baby's birth. The painting really reflects the fellowship that surrounded Christ on his birth. And maybe in these really strange times that we're in, still in, I know, we've actually all been drawn closer together. In some ways, I think we feel like we've been pushed apart because we're not able to physically get near or perhaps see our loved ones. But there are other fellowships, perhaps in our communities, that we've been drawn closer to. I know I have gotten to know my neighbours more. This painting really reiterates the importance of that community and how we can be drawn from all different places and pulled together. This painting really has to strike us at this time of year of the importance of fellowship, of community, of church. And I'm now going to pass over to Charmaine to expand on that.
Thank you very much, Zoe. I just want to pick up on some theological themes and motifs. It is indeed an amazing painting at St Mary's, and many of you will have spent a long time looking at it over the years. It is beautiful, and as Zoe has so rightly said, the more you look, the more you definitely see. If we look carefully, though, you can suddenly see that there's all sorts of people there. It's not necessarily the people you would expect to see there. Obviously, the gospel accounts tell us about the innkeepers, the animals, the shepherds, the angels, the wise men or wise people, and their whole of their entourage. But if you look very carefully, there are lots of other people in that painting. All have come to see him, to greet Christ at his birth. Now, the question for us today, I think, is where would we be in that painting, and where are we now? So would you be, for example, with the innkeeper and his team or her team as they're trying to cope with the huge influx of people? Would you been helping them to keep everything going, keeping the food coming out and the drink coming out? Or maybe you might have been outside of the pack team. You might have been with the shepherds up on the hillside, and you suddenly have this amazing throng of angels coming to give you the good news. Or maybe you might have preferred to have been with the animals in the stable. Or you might have been with the kings and their entourage. But it's a good question for us to ask ourselves, I think. where would we have been and where are we now, and to ponder that over this season of Advent, Christmas and Epiphany. I'm just going to hand over now to Zoe for our next artwork.
Thank you. So next we're going to look at a painting that I found really reflected one of the lines in this wonderful carol, Upon This Blessed Morn. So the painting we're going to look at is one of the Monet's haystack series. I love his haystack series. It's one of 25 paintings he did. He painted them all in a year. It was quite incredible. These haystacks actually were in a field near where his house was in Giverny. He struggled to capture the scenes because the light was changing so fast, it was so dramatic. So he decided the only way to do it was to do part of the painting in situ, in the field, and part of it back in the studio. But he knew once he started that actually he was so drawn to painting these haystacks and these scenes and how they changed with the lights changing at different times of day, that he actually decided to pay the farmer to leave the haystacks in the field for the entire winter. This would not normally happen. It was a very mild winter and he had to pay the farmer to leave it as it was because he just couldn't resist these wonderful scenes. They are almost abstract in the way that they sort of stand on these fields. They're quite unusual, they're an unusual shape. I love the fact that their influence really reached forwards into so many other artists' works going forwards. In the painting we see that the sunlight is breaking through that white, heavy sky, a little bit like the one we have today but with less sunshine. And as that sun breaks through, it's starting to melt the snow on the left-hand side of the haystacks. It gives us this real sense of warmth and of promise and of renewal, even on that really cold morning that he painted this in. We also, though, see on the far side of the haystacks, on the right-hand side, the snow is still there. So when we are out of that sunlight, when we're away from that warmth, when we're away from that promise, that renewal, that heat and that comfort, it can still be so very cold. There are shadows cast along the ground by these giant haystacks, and it really shows us this sense of sort of almost darkness, this gloominess, but surrounded by this brightness and this sunshine and the crystal white. Sometimes in this cold, that tiny glimpse of warmth can change how a painting feels to us. I'm now going to pass over to Charmaine to talk a little bit more about that.
Thank you, thanks very much. Don't you just feel, looking at this artwork, a sense of winter, but also somehow a sense of a future promise? Almost as though you've been out on a long winter's walk and you're going to go home and have a lovely fire and a cup of tea, maybe a slice of Christmas cake, possibly a chocolate biscuit. I mean, all of that, when you look at that, that gives you that wonderful feeling. The talk today, as Zoe has mentioned, is based upon that wonderful old carol, God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen. It was written in the 16th century, or possibly even earlier. The first early copy of it, written down, was 1760. So it's a very familiar Christmas carol to lots and lots of generations. Perhaps it's a good idea to glance at some of the words, because when you hear the first words, God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen, what does that really mean? What do those words mean then? So rest is not, let's just sit down and have a quick nap. It's not that. It's actually meaning to keep, to cause to continue, or to remain. So in other words, God rest ye, it's keep you. God rest ye, God keep you, God remain with you. And merry, it does not mean you've just come back from the Rose and Crown. I mean, it could be, but it doesn't actually mean that. It means pleasant, bountiful and prosperous. And then we have that wonderful tidings, the tidings of comfort and joy. Tidings means good news, information, making an announcement, which is certainly what this season is all about. So the connection with tidings of comfort and joy, Jesus' birth, that long expected moment for the nation as they look forward to the future Messiah coming. And he came in a totally unexpected way. We have cause to continue our faith journey, just as they did, just as those people did that we were talking about around the crib, to remain in it and with it, and to keep the faith, to be pleasant, bountiful and prosperous, and perhaps to be bountiful, particularly this season, with our kindness. I'm going to hand over now to Zoe for our next piece of fantastic artwork.
Thank you. So, one of the lines that I read in this wonderful carol was "In tempest, storm and wind." This really evoked such strong imagery and quite a strong reaction for me. I found a marvellous painting called "Snowstorm, Hannibal Crossing the Alps." This was painted by William Turner in 1812. The painting doesn't focus on Hannibal, who was riding his elephant. He was the commander of the Carthaginian army sometime between 200 and 100 BC. But actually, instead of focusing on that key person in the story, this painting actually focuses on the human vulnerability when faced with the enormity and the power of nature. The attention here is very much drawn to the victims of the conflict, both the aggressors and the people trying to fight back. On the left-hand side, you have the Carthaginian army. You have Hannibal's men struggling, trying to battle the elements to get towards the natives who are ready to fight them. There's a massive, curving, menacing black storm that sweeps across the side of the painting. This dominates the sky, and it really looks like it's almost poised to descend on us, to crash down. The soldiers are underneath. They look in so much peril. There is a bright orange sun, though, glinting through that top, through that darkness, through that black, attempting to break through the clouds. On the right-hand side of the valley, though, in major contrast, there is a white snow avalanche. It's cascading down the mountain. It's actually quite hard to see. So even though they're all trying to battle these elements, you've got this major storm, this huge vortex of cloud. On the other side, you've also got this contrasting white avalanche coming towards them. They're pinned in. This twisted composition with geometric axes and perspectives broke the traditional rules of composition. It was the first time Turner had painted like this, and he went on to paint like this many times going forwards. Turner created a dynamic balance of contrasting light and dark that occurred many times in later works. I'm going to hand over to Charmaine now.
Well, I have to say this is an amazing Turner picture, and it really conjures up seeing and being in a storm. A storm, as we've heard, of many parts. Now, if I'm right, I think I'm right anyway, Turner loved to try and get the essence of nature. He wanted to paint the essence of nature. And one of the things I'm sure perhaps some of you already know is that he did this amazing picture, I think it was called Speed, Steam and Rain. And he also once had himself strapped to the mast of a ship so that he could experience what a storm would really be like. Goodness knows what the crew thought. And I think Turner also, I've read, was slightly concerned that he wouldn't even come back from being in the middle of this storm. So you've got this painter who loves being in the middle of these, or trying to capture these storms, these things of nature, and then to put them into this historical setting of Hannibal crossing the Alps. But looking at this, it makes us think as well, doesn't it? There's a storm about to envelop Hannibal, as Zoe's just said, and his army, plus a storm about to come, that massive avalanche. Oh, and there's another army there as well, going to have a go at you. Well, we have all experienced this year a year of difficulty, uncertainty and restrictions. And in some way or other, we have all been touched by the pandemic. And as with most situations, there is light and dark with it. Together, we are slowly seeing a way through. It's brought a lot into sharp focus. Our communities, our church and our faith, having to do things in a different way. But underpinning all that we do is our faith. A faith we celebrate at this time of year. The birth of Christ, the breaking through the dark clouds, tidings of comfort and joy to all of us during these difficult times, but also to people who are particularly stressed, to the lonely, the displaced, the outcast, the bereaved, the weary, those who are anxious, the refugees and the migrants. tidings of comfort and joy are there for us. And now we're going to hear the wonderful choir sing that beautiful carol, God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen.
God rest you, merry gentlemen, let nothing you dismay, for Jesus Christ our Saviour was born upon this day, to save us all from Satan's power when we were gone astray. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy, comfort and joy. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy. From God our Heavenly Father, the blessed angel came, and unto certain shepherds brought tidings of the same, how that in Bethlehem was born the Son of God by name. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy, comfort and joy. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy. The shepherds of those tidings rejoiced much in mind, and left their flocks a-feeding in tempest, storm, and wind, and went to Bethlehem straightway this blessed babe to find. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy, comfort and joy. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy. But when to Bethlehem they came, whereas this infant lay, they found him in a manger, where oxen feed on hay. His mother Mary kneeling unto the Lord did pray. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy, comfort and joy. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy. Now
Thank you very much, choir. That was beautiful, and I know that you spent a lot of time rehearsing and filming that, so thank you for that. And now I'm going to hand over to Zoe for our final little piece about some art and some theological themes and motifs.
One of the last lines of this wonderful carol that I was going to focus on was each other now embrace. It seems particularly poignant for this time of year, and certainly for this year in particular. The piece of art that really struck me with this line was one of the Barbara Hepworth pieces. It's called The Winged Figure. It was made in 1963. It was actually unveiled on the side of John Lewis department store in Oxford Street in London. Hepworth wanted to do a piece of artwork that was placed on the side of a building that had real power and presence. It's a major sense of calm when you look up at it, and it was huge. You look up at it on the side of a building and it's sort of looking over people. It's beautiful in its simplicity. She was really struck by the whole ethos of the John Lewis department store and the company. She was very much appreciating about the fact that it was collectively owned by its workers. It was a very unusual ethos to have for a business at that time. She loved the site. She felt it gave great exposure for the artwork, not for personal gain, but she just felt so proud of what it represented. The design itself of the winged figure was praised for embodying the ideas of resurgence or aspiration, long associated with the John Lewis partnership at the time, and for offering a solace amidst the bustle and the noise and the stress of a busy high street. Hepworth was actually one of the first artists to create abstract situational art, so in place in an area. It wasn't placed in a museum, it wasn't placed in a wonderful sculpture garden, it was in the middle of our busy everyday lives. There are pierced holes on either side, on the wings, showing that relationship between the inside and the out. She wanted to create different surfaces inside the wings. She wanted it to look different. She could find no modern contemporary methods that would give her the finish she wanted. So she actually decided to use filler material for dented car panels. She experimented repeatedly to get the finish she wanted. She had to find new ways to achieve what she wanted. In these strange times, we've all had to try and find new ways to get through, new ways to do things. This is a case in point. You have to find, sometimes you have to evolve and try and find new ways, as did Hepworth. The threaded strings on the wings create a wonderful tension between the centre of the wings and the outside. There's a beautiful power with the wings as they curve around, and there's a real sense of calm and serenity as this winged figure overlooks this busy high street. As we started this talk looking at that amazing painting in St Mary's itself over the doors, we're now going to look finally at the wonderful carved angels that are inside St Mary's on the wooden screen. Like Hepworth's figure, the winged figure, these angels represent the idea of something or someone greater than ourselves, watching over us, always there, constant. However much everything else moves around it, they're still there. They represent comfort, security, warmth and protection. Their interlocking wings show a real strength and a unity. And as with the Rubens style painting at the beginning, we're reminded that in these strange and sometimes frightening times, we have to look to our angels, to our fellowship. I'm going to hand over to Charmaine now.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Each other now embrace. That is such a poignant phrase, particularly for all of us, that after having the year that we've had. It means a huge amount to be able to just sort of shake hands with somebody or give them a hug. So this whole idea of each other now embrace is really beautiful. And the idea of a winged figure on John Lewis' wall, looking down on Oxford Street, that's amazing, isn't it? It's just amazing. And imagine all the people who are going around shopping, getting their Christmas presents, getting their Christmas coats or their Christmas hats, or something like that. You know, you just imagine that. And that above them is this amazing winged figure. And that strong theme of a throng of winged figures on that hillside in Bethlehem 2,000 years ago or more. That, I think, is the thing that we need to hang on to. The idea that was that wondrous night, and the shepherds were completely amazed. And then they were charged with something. They were told, you need to go and tell everybody about the good tidings. You need to go and see for yourselves the Christ child and spread the glad tidings, the tidings of comfort and joy. So really, I think that's a call for us all to embrace our strong and active faith, because it is for all of us, but in different ways. It's a strong and active faith, and for us to take that forward into the new year with tidings of comfort and joy. And so we wish you all a peaceful and joyous time.